Okay, it's 10:48 in the morning. I have to re-record this whole thing because the first time that I recorded it, it was a mess and the mouse wasn't there and you could not tell where anything was. So, let's try again. Hello everybody, I'm Jake Neutron, and today I'm just going to go over some basic tools that I use in Adobe Animate as like a part 1 to a tutorial series that I kind of want to do. Take this as a pilot. If you like it, I'll do more. Adobe Animate has been a program that I've been using for over half a decade. It's a very powerful tool. It's just not stable. It is not stable. Adobe Animate is not stable. For me, when I was first starting out and learning Adobe Animate, I found this one tutorial video that went over like the basic tools and just like the basic stuff that you would be using when opening the program, and that was a very good foundation because I was able to figure out everything else after that, like on my own. Because I can't find the video again, I decided I'll make my own version for other people who follow me. So I guess let's dive into creating a file. You know, when you open the program, it's going to give you this new document window. I always use the regular HD preset. I don't go to full HD and 4K because I'm going to be real with you, this is a vector program. You do not need to be working with a really huge canvas. Having a large canvas means that the computer has to think a little harder about the project because of the size, so it's best to just stay at 720 or anywhere lower that works for you. I always work with 720. Now, when you first open the program, it was like if this is your first time opening the program, your layout's probably gonna look different than mine. Maybe even if this isn't your first time opening it, it probably will look different than mine. But I'm going to just show you briefly different areas of the layout. Over here is where I placed all my tools. Down here is the timeline. There's an output section that usually it will just like tell you if there's errors with it trying to render or something. I think it's more useful for if you're like doing games in Adobe Animate, because then this is basically just the debug window. And then over here is where I put all my literally every other tab that I use. I have my properties tab over here. I have my library tab over here. My assets tab, which I never use. I don't even know why I still have it there. I use my frame picker is here, and my color tab is here. And down here, I've placed some of the plugins that I have downloaded. They're not very useful right now, so I'm just going to close group. The first set of tools that I'm gonna go over are basically all the drawing tools that you use to create things on the stage and etc. Before I discuss the different tools, I want to talk about the difference between fills and strokes. Fills and strokes are two different kinds of what I'm going to call drawing objects in Adobe Animate. So let's grab this rectangle tool and let's draw. Well, let me pick two distinct colors. To the left. In fact, you know, let's choose a little bit more of a distinct color than yellow. It's kind of blended with the background. But okay. So we have the stroke, and we have the fill. The fill is what you would assume it would be. It's kind of just the filled-in area of a drawing. Most drawings in the program are probably going to be fills. Yeah, you can move and morph them however you please. But then the strokes are kind of stuff that can go around fills and or be filled. But one thing that lines have over fills is that like most of the editing that you're gonna do to fills is going to be completely manual. Like you're going to have to like move the vertices of those shapes on your own. You can do the same thing with strokes, but also you can change the width of the stroke. You can change the way the width dynamically works. Like you can change if like you want it to taper off in a certain way. You can even change the style of you can even change the style of the stroke. You can choose from this library of different kinds of brushes that can be used, and even you can even make some that can be used on these strokes. You can also change rather the corners of it are going to be round or just kind of beveled off or sharp, etc., etc. Very flexible. Strokes are very flexible. Another difference between fills and strokes is that they have their own, like, how would I describe? The program organizes them into their own, like, color types. Like, you're going to have, down here in this section is where you usually will, like, mess with your colors or select what colors that you are currently using, or you're going to draw, or you're going to fill. This is the fill color. And then this is the stroke color. And whatever colors you select here will be the ones that you will create with. And it'll be like that for all tools. Well, now that we've gone over that, let's now look over the tools that use the fill and strokes in various ways. So the first tool that most people are going to be just kind of like, it's going to be obvious to them, is the classic brush tool. The classic brush tool is probably the most basic way to draw in this program. Drew a little Jake with the classic brush tool. The classic brush tool creates fills. Like, all your drawings are going to be made of fills. The same goes for the fluid brush tool, which is kind of like the classic brush tool, but the classic brush tool has only a few settings. You can mess with the size of the brush, and you can change the minimum size of it and the smoothing and a few other settings that like aren't really relevant for right now. Meanwhile, the fluid brush tool is closer to the kind of control you would probably have with a Photoshop or Procreate brush. Maybe excluding like being able to mess with the texture, but like you can, it has a stabilizer, it has curve smoothing, etc., etc. I don't typically use this, and it's mainly because I don't think my computer is powerful enough to handle it. When I draw with it, that happens. It's supposed to look smooth, like super smooth, but not with me. It gets a little confused when I draw too fast, so I tend to. Then we have the line tool, which you'll be shocked creates lines. Another tool that creates lines, but it's this one I was so happy when they introduced it because it was essentially a way to draw more controlled lines in the same way that you would using the classic brush. They had a tool called the pencil tool, but like you couldn't control the sensitivity, and like it didn't really respond to your pressure settings on your pen. But now we have the paintbrush tool, which creates lines that look like that, and you can still edit them in the same way that you would be able to edit other lines. Change the stroke size, you can change the width density, etc., etc. Very useful. Next we have the pen tool, which is essentially like the line tool, except continuous until you like stop it or something. When you're drawing objects, if you hold down, you can like control the curve like this. I feel like there's a good chunk of tools in here that if you use Adobe Illustrator, you'll be like, oh yeah, like that. I don't know nothing about Adobe Illustrator though, so I don't know how different these two are. One more tool that messes with lines is the width tool, which you can use to make points and control the width of lines at certain places. You can move where the width is controlled. It's very useful for if you want a little bit more control over how your lines look on drawings. And then there is the color picker, which you can use obviously to color pick colors. I will say though, I just learned this the other day when I was recording the first version of this tutorial, that when you color pick on the color picker can tell if you're color picking from outline or a fill. So if you use the color picker on a fill, it's going to copy that color to the fill thing over here. But if you use the color picker on a line, it's going to color pick it to the strokes thing. I really wish I knew what this was called. And one last tool to look at for these drawing objects is the paint bucket tool and the ink bottle tool. The paint bucket tool is basically a way to fill in or recolor fill objects. So see right here, this box that's closed, I can fill it in with the fill color. Or if I wanted to change the color of any of these here, I could choose a different color for the fill, and oh look, I can recolor. Ooh, didn't even do that. On the flip of the coin, there is the ink bottle tool, which the ink bottle does the reverse, where it creates strokes. You can either use it to change existing ones. Like, by the way, with the ink bottle tool, you can also change like the stroke size or what it's going to create and the width. So I could do that and it will just change it like that. Or I can use it to create strokes around fill objects that already exist. So if I use the ink bottle on the square, it's going to put lines around it. If I use it around this disgusting line I have drawn with the fluid brush, it will create lines around it. And there are a lot of very useful applications for doing this stuff. This is also something that I found useful, especially when doing shading, is that when you select everything, you can go over to here and you can manually change the colors like this, which is cool on its own, but you can also just decide to completely delete them like this. And you can do the same thing with the strokes. Now the reason why this is useful is, say, let's reset these colors. You want to do like some cell shading on a drawing. You could use the line tool or the paintbrush tool. Create a line there. And say you want to recolor it to darker color here. We're like, oh no, now there's this disgusting stroke in the way. We'll just go over to here and kill it. And there you go. Now you have a cell shaded. I think if there is any other tool that I would like to show off real quick before we move on to the selection tools, the text tool. And it does what you think it is. It makes text. So I'm going to call this side, oh, I cannot spell, strokes. Now, the interesting thing about text objects is that they're made of fills technically, but grouped in such a way that you can't edit them like fills unless you break them apart. So say if you really wanted to like mess with these outside of the regular settings of like when you have a text object, you can mess with the font, you can mess with the size, you can mess with the color. It will say fill right here. There are paragraph and align settings down here. But if you break these apart, the first layer of breaking them apart just turns them into several different letters, which could be useful on its own if you wanted to turn them all into symbols and animate them separately. You could do cool stuff like that. You could do cool stuff with that, and I might show that off someday. But if you break them apart again, they just turn into fills, just regular fills you can mess with in the same way that you would any other fills. You can even ink bottle them. Wow, that is disgusting. Oh, real quick, I did forget one tool. I forgot about the eraser tool. Do you need me to explain what the eraser tool does? Do you need it? Do you need... Let's move on to the selection objects. I'm gonna draw something real quick that we can use for manipulating. Oh, look at her. There's a little Ellie. Which, by the way, there is going to be a plush line of her made soon, so that's going to be exciting. The first one is just the regular selection tool. You can use that, you can select drawing objects, symbols, literally anything on stage you can just select with it. Move them around and whatnot. But you are limited. I feel like you're most likely not going to be using the selection tool unless you just need to select something very accurately. And then there's like a subselection tool, which when you click on a drawing object or something, it will like show all the vertices and points on it. Again, you probably aren't going to be using that unless you are like doing cleanup. The tool that you are probably going to use the most is the free transform tool. And with the free transform tool, actually gives you the ability to, well, you know, transform stuff. So say we select everything, it gives you the ability to rotate, skew, scale, and move, which you could do anyways, but now you can do all four. To rotate objects, you don't grab the specific corner, but you grab next to it, or really next to any of these corners, and it lets you be able to rotate the object on its pivot here, like in the center, this little dot. If you want to scale an object, you do grab it from either any of the corners or any of these dots, really, any of these like square dots along the vertices and faces of the object. If you want to be able to scale it, but if you want to scale it uniformly, hold shift, and that should keep it maintained size. If you want to skew an object, you grab one of the lines on any of the sides. It should give you the ability to skew however which way you want. And this pivot here, if you moving this pivot anywhere will control from what point the scaling and rotation stuff happens. So like if I have the scale here, it's going to shrink towards the pivot. If I have the pivot there, it will also rotate from that pivot as well. I believe the skew also does it too. Well, it will skew from the pivot. One last selection thing is these various selection. Next is the lasso tool over here. Just like in every other art program, the lasso tool lets you draw this like line around everything, and whatever is in there will get selected. Alternatively, there is the Polygon tool, which I'm going to be real with you, I never use because I find it absolutely infuriating. Because you can get all the way around, but it's very hard to just complete the thing. It will just... Ugh. And then the last tool is the Magic Wand tool, which the Magic Wand tool, I'm pretty sure is meant to like work in the same way that it does like in Procreate and Photoshop, where it will grab a certain threshold of colors. I find it's most useful when you are trying to edit bitmap fills. So let me grab an image real quick. Let's use the thumbnail for this. Now, this is a bitmap object. It could be a PNG, JPEG, whatever. It will just turn into a bitmap when it's put into Adobe Animate. For us to use the magic wand tool on it, we're going to have to break it apart and turn it into what I think is essentially just a bitmap fill, where it is a fill color, but just the picture. It's just the picture. But with that, you are able to use the magic wand tool and select just like you would in Photoshop or anything else. And you can grab based on that. Like, look at that. Oh, I forgot the end. With the selection tools out of the way, let's move on to looking at some of the stage and timeline tools. So this here is the hand tool. You can use it to move around the stage. Hold on. You have to make sure that you're not on. If you're on fit in window, it will always just stick right there. So you're on select choose frame so that it's more free roam. And now you can move this around the stage. If you want to recenter it, you can use the recenter thing. There's also the rotation tool, which you can access either through over here or by clicking it over here. And it lets you rotate the stage. So if you have like a drawing that you need to like do from a different angle, you can do that. And then there's the time scrub tool, which this would be way more useful to show off if I was doing an animation right now. But essentially it just kind of scrubs through the timeline right here. You can just like drag, click and drag, go forwards and back how you want. There obviously the zoom tool, which you can use to zoom in, zoom out. You can use it like the selection tool and zoom to specifically what you want. The last one is the camera tool, which when you click on it, it will create a camera layer. And the camera is very useful for animations and scenes, mainly because before, if you didn't have a program like VCam, if you wanted the camera to move around, you essentially had to take every object in the scene and put them into certain symbols and manually animate them moving around, like manually slide them around with some tweetings. Now, with the camera tool, you can just move just the camera and it will move across the stage. You can zoom, fucking auto recovery. You can zoom, you can tilt. It's animatable on the timeline. You can animate the camera. I'll probably show that off a little some other time. There are different effects for it. There are some advanced layer settings where like you can have multiple layers that there's different depth to them. So when the camera moves around, it will look like it's parallaxing. It is not perfect. Somehow, Adobe Animate still fucks up this. If you are going to use layer depth stuff, you're gonna never want it to go. You're never gonna want layers to go under 0. Because when things are in the foreground, it gets all glitchy with the rendering. So you're gonna want to always like stage things of the thing that's in the front, the most front, will always be at 0, and then everything else, their depth will be higher, just to prevent things from breaking. I think I've gone over everything. Oh wait, I haven't shown you all the asset warp tool. Okay, so there is this neat tool that they introduced a little while back called the Asset Warp tool. And the Asset Warp tool is very powerful. I think it's the most powerful thing that they've introduced in this program. But it is very broken. Very broken. I will create something to demonstrate. Last night I drew Glazy as an example, and you know what? I'll do it again. I'll do it again from scratch. You know what? We're going to make Glazy dance. That's what we're going to do. By the way, if I'm editing this the same day that I'm recording it, that means that it's Glazy's birthday. So happy birthday, Glazy! Oh, it's Cypher's birthday. Happy birthday, Cypher. Happy birthday to Cypher and Glazy. swear every single time I've drawn Glazy the past few days, I've used a different shade of green. Let's optimize this real quick, because one thing, when you're using the asset warp tool, if you want to have the least amount of glitching, optimize the drawing. The asset warp tool, I keep calling it the pen tool sometimes, but that's not what it is. The asset warp tool is basically like a puppeteering like tool that can be used on drawing objects and bitmaps. I might do some experiments with like animating bitmaps and then do a tutorial on that. But for now, let's take this drawing that I've created. We're gonna turn it into a little dancing thing with Glazy. Oh yeah, look at them go. So basically what the asset warp tool does is that it's you're able to put these pins into an object so that you can control how they are morphed around. And this is very powerful, especially for if you have like some simple motions like hair or such that you want to manipulate without having to completely redraw them every single time. In some places it will look better than trying to redraw it, but in other places it will be better to just redraw it yourself. A lot of this is like, it works with tweening, but tweening is a very hard thing to control. I feel like if I ever do a video about how to use tweening, that's going to be, that might actually end up being its own series because tweening is a little complicated. But for now, let's do a quick animation of, you know, Glazy just doing a little dance. This is definitely an interesting route that I could take, but we can get a little bit more extra than this. These both look crazy. But this is indeed how you can use that warp tool. Alright, so I feel like that's about the end of this basics tutorial. Again, consider this like the pilot to doing a larger set of tutorial videos. I have a lot of knowledge on Adobe Animate, so I might as well be sharing it. I wanted to originally do this live, but my computer is not strong enough to handle that. So for now, I either gonna have to do just these videos or figure out some way to like maybe do like Discord streaming tutorials. Like maybe I'll like use one of my friends' servers or just create one specifically for this. But for now, tell me your thoughts in the comment section. If you have questions, I will try to answer them, depending on if they are too if they're simple enough to where I could just say them in the comment section, or if they're too complicated, I'm gonna have to just do a video on them. But until then, I am Jig Neutron. Thanks for watching.